The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees, and the faint sound of children playing echoed in the distance. It was a picture-perfect afternoon, the kind of day that trickled by with gentle ease. But for Hannah, it was anything but ordinary. As she stepped outside, the familiar warmth of the late afternoon air wrapped around her. She stood on the porch for a moment, taking in the peaceful stillness, a sense of relief washing over her as she watched her daughter, Lily, play in the driveway. Lily was in her wheelchair, but the joy on her face as she spun her wheels and laughed to herself was contagious. Everything felt right. Everything felt safe. But that was before everything changed. Without warning, the calm was shattered by the screeching tires of a car pulling up too fast in front of their house. The neighborhood, once so quiet, was suddenly filled with the blaring noise of chaos. Hannah turned to see a figure stepping out of the car. It was Karen, the HOA neighbor. Her face was twisted in anger, her body language tense as she marched up the driveway. "Lily! Move away from the road. You look dangerous," Karen shouted, her voice sharp and accusatory. Hannah froze, taken aback by the venom in Karen's words. She looked at Lily, who had stopped spinning her wheels and now sat there, confusion clouding her expression. "What are you talking about?" Hannah called out, rushing toward the driveway. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unfamiliar tension. "I'm calling the authorities," Karen snapped, her hand reaching for her phone. "You can't be out here like this. You're a threat to the whole neighborhood." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Her mind raced as she stepped forward, trying to understand what was happening. But nothing made sense. Karen's voice, filled with fear and judgment, drowned out the usual sounds of the neighborhood. A sense of dread settled in Hannah's chest as she turned back to Lily. She reached for her daughter's hand, wanting to assure her everything would be okay. But deep down, Hannah knew, nothing would ever be the same again. Nothing prepares you for the moment when your life is turned upside down, Hannah thought to herself, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at Karen dialing the phone. This was just the beginning. Hannah had always been the kind of woman who found peace in the little things. Her life, though not without its challenges, had a quiet rhythm that she had learned to cherish. The days were simple, full of routine and love. The mornings began with Lily's laughter as she woke up to the sound of her mother humming in the kitchen. Lily, who was born with a rare neurological disorder, had spent most of her life in a wheelchair, but that never stopped her from smiling or dreaming. Every day, Hannah made it her mission to create a world where Lily could feel like every other child. There were no limits, no boundaries, only the promise of a mother's undying love. Together, they had learned to navigate the world on Lily's terms, and it had become a beautiful existence in its own right. On weekends, they would often sit on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids run and play. Lily loved watching them. She would tap on the glass of her wheelchair, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Hannah would laugh and promise, "One day, sweetheart, we'll join them." In their backyard, Hannah had created a small garden, a lush green space with flowers Lily loved to pick. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Hannah had built flower beds that Lily could reach from her chair, carefully choosing plants that would bloom year-round. It was these moments, tending to the garden together, that made Hannah feel like they were just another family, living a normal life. Dinner time was sacred for them. They had their small rituals. Lily would help Hannah set the table, always insisting on placing the silverware just right. The aroma of Hannah's cooking filled the house, and there was always a sense of warmth in their simple, but heartfelt meals. Lily loved when they would sit down together and talk about their day, even if it was just about the birds in the yard or the clouds in the sky. "She wasn't just my daughter, she was my heart, my everything," Hannah would often say, especially when people admired how strong she was in taking care of Lily. But the truth was, Hannah didn't see herself as anything special. To her, she was simply doing what any mother would do, loving her child with everything she had. But their peaceful life wasn't without its challenges. There were the occasional stares from strangers when they were out in public, the whispered comments about Lily's condition. But Hannah had learned to brush them off. She never let the opinions of others define who Lily was. She wasn't defined by her disability, and neither was Hannah. Together, they made their own world, one where love conquered all obstacles. Still, there were moments when Hannah felt the weight of the world press down on her. The isolation. The constant battle against the limitations of Lily's condition. But those moments were fleeting. They always passed when Lily's laughter filled the room again, or when she would look up at her mother with those big, trusting eyes. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Hannah had lived in their home for years, content in the simplicity of her life. Lily had made friends with a few of the local children, but they mostly played together in the yard, never venturing far beyond the safety of their home. It was their little sanctuary. But nothing lasts forever. That afternoon, as Hannah stood on the porch watching Lily wheel herself down the driveway, the tranquility of their life began to unravel in an instant. Karen, the HOA neighbor, was known for being outspoken and dramatic, but Hannah had never imagined her actions would take such a dark turn. In the blink of an eye, the safe bubble that Hannah and Lily had built together was shattered. Karen's accusations were the first crack in the facade of their peaceful existence. What had been a beautiful day just moments before was now filled with an ominous tension, one that would change the course of their lives forever. Hannah never imagined she would be standing there, on the edge of losing everything she held dear. But the day was coming, and she had no idea how much it would take to hold on. It all happened in a flash. Hannah had just finished planting the last of the marigolds in Lily's flower bed when the calm that had enveloped the day was shattered. The sudden screech of tires broke the silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. Hannah turned around to see a car with tinted windows parked too close to the curb in front of their house. Her heart sank as she recognized the figure stepping out of the vehicle. It was Karen, the HOA neighbor everyone tried to avoid. She was marching up the driveway, her heels clicking against the concrete with an unsettling urgency. Hannah braced herself, already knowing this wasn't going to be good. "Lily! Move away from the road. You look dangerous." Karen yelled across the yard, her voice shrill and accusatory. The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving Hannah frozen in place. Lily, who had been happily wheeling herself back and forth in the driveway, stopped in her tracks. Her face shifted from joy to confusion as she turned toward the sound of Karen's shouting. "What? What are you talking about?" Hannah called out, stepping forward to protect her daughter, though she had no idea what was going on. Karen was already holding up her phone, her finger poised above the dial. "I'm calling the authorities," Karen spat, her eyes wide with alarm. "This is a liability. She looks dangerous. I feel threatened. You're putting everyone here at risk." Hannah blinked, unable to process the words. She had been hearing Karen complain about trivial things for months now, overgrown grass, a misplaced garbage can, but this? This was beyond anything she had expected. Her stomach twisted in confusion and dread. Lily is just a child. She's not dangerous. Hannah exclaimed, walking toward Karen with a growing sense of disbelief. "What on earth are you talking about?" But Karen was already too far gone, her gaze fixed firmly on Lily as though she were an immediate threat. "She's sitting too close to the street," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "And don't you dare try to make excuses. I've seen her out here before, and every time, I feel like something's off. I'm not the only one who's worried." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. Karen wasn't just upset, she was irrational, her words tinged with something darker, something more dangerous than simple concern. Hannah could see the crowd beginning to gather in the windows of the neighbors' houses, a few of them peeking out to watch the drama unfold. It was clear that Karen was not going to back down. She didn't just see a disabled girl, she saw a problem she wanted to eliminate, Hannah thought, the realization hitting her with a sickening thud. Karen had already made up her mind. Lily wasn't just an innocent child to her. She was a liability, a threat to the quiet, controlled environment Karen wanted to protect. "Karen, this is insane," Hannah said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "My daughter is not a threat. She's just playing." But Karen wasn't listening. Her finger was already pressing the call button, and within moments, the sound of an emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. Hannah felt a surge of panic rise in her chest. Karen was calling the cops on her daughter, on Lily, who had never hurt a soul in her life. As the dispatcher's voice grew clearer, Karen took a step back, watching with a smug sense of self-righteousness. "I'll leave it to the professionals to deal with this. I've done my part," she said coldly, as if she were somehow the hero in this situation. For Hannah, it felt like the world was spinning. This wasn't just a dispute about the yard or the driveway. This was something bigger. Something terrifying. Lily's eyes locked with Hannah's, confusion and fear written all over her face. Hannah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had to protect her daughter, no matter what. But in that moment, she felt the weight of the situation crash down on her. This wasn't just a small conflict anymore. This was about to spiral out of control in a way that neither of them could have ever anticipated. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Hannah stood there, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Karen was still on the phone with the authorities, her eyes never leaving Lily, who was now gripping her wheelchair handles tightly, her small face showing visible anxiety. "I'm not going to let her sit there and make everyone feel unsafe," Karen continued, her voice louder now, cutting through the thick air. Lily's eyes darted nervously to Hannah, and it broke Hannah's heart. Her daughter was retreating into herself, her peaceful world now shattered by someone who didn't even know her. "Lily." Hannah called, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're not in trouble." But the words barely seemed to reach her. Lily's small hands clenched harder onto the wheelchair as she started to roll slowly backward toward the front door, her movements hesitant, like a frightened animal seeking refuge. "Lily, stop. Come back." Hannah shouted, her tone shifting to one of panic, but it was too late. Lily had already retreated into the house, and Karen was still standing there, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You're just going to let her hide away like that?" Karen sneered, eyes narrowing as she turned to Hannah, clearly enjoying the power she felt in this moment. "This isn't just about a little girl playing in the street. This is about responsibility. You've got a disabled child out here, and I'm not the only one who's worried. The whole neighborhood is starting to talk." Hannah felt the blood rush to her face, anger flooding her veins. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Karen was making it sound like Lily was a problem to be solved, a threat that needed to be eliminated. But Hannah wasn't going to let her talk about Lily that way, not in front of everyone, not like this. "No, Karen," Hannah said, her voice tight, trying to keep control. "Lily is my daughter. She has every right to be here. She's not hurting anyone. You're the one causing trouble." But Karen didn't flinch. She barely even acknowledged Hannah's words. Her eyes were locked on the house now, as if calculating her next move. "Just because you're her mother doesn't mean you can ignore the facts. I'm doing this for everyone's safety. You'll see. I'm not the only one who feels this way," she snapped, hanging up the phone with a satisfied look on her face. The neighbors were gathering now, watching from their windows, standing at a distance but close enough to make their presence felt. It was like a silent audience to a play where Hannah felt like the villain, even though she knew she wasn't. The stares from behind curtains and glass were all too clear. Karen was getting exactly what she wanted. As Karen took a few steps forward, Hannah stepped in her path, blocking her from walking any closer to the house. "You need to leave, Karen. Right now. You've done enough." But Karen didn't back down. Instead, she took a step forward, her voice low and threatening. "You think I'm overreacting? You're the one who's in denial. The only reason I'm not pressing charges right now is because I'm giving you a chance to make things right." The words stung, but Hannah wasn't going to let her break her. Lily was in the house, safe for now, but Hannah knew the damage had been done. She could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on her, their judgment like a weight she could barely carry. She wasn't just defending her daughter anymore, she was defending her whole family, her life. "Karen, I'm asking you to leave," Hannah said firmly, her voice shaking but resolute. But Karen only laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made Hannah's skin crawl. "What's the matter, Hannah? Scared? Scared of what people are going to think? I'm doing the right thing here, and I don't need you to tell me otherwise." With that, Karen turned and walked back to her car, but not before stopping just long enough to shoot a final, venomous glance over her shoulder. As Karen pulled away from the curb, Hannah stood frozen, still in the driveway, her heart pounding. Her legs felt weak beneath her, but she stayed standing. She could hear the murmurs of the neighbors from behind their windows, the quiet whispers filling the air with tension. Karen had left, but the damage was done. Hannah turned toward the house, her heart heavy. She could hear Lily crying through the window, her sobs muffled but unmistakable. The neighborhood had seen it all. The humiliation, the fear, the judgment. And Hannah realized in that moment, this wasn't going to end with Karen leaving. This was just the beginning. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was shattered by the piercing sound of sirens. The red and blue lights painted the street in a flickering, surreal glow, their ominous presence marking the arrival of the law. But something felt off, Hannah could sense it in the air. The tension was thick, heavier than it had ever been before. As the police cars pulled up, Karen stood near the curb, her arms crossed, her face a mask of satisfaction. She was talking to the officers, her words quick and sharp, no doubt painting Lily as the dangerous figure she had described so many times. The officers seemed to listen intently, nodding in agreement, but Hannah noticed something strange. Their gaze flickered briefly toward Lily, who was standing just inside the front door, clearly distressed. Why are they taking her seriously? Hannah thought, the sharp pang of fear digging deeper into her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't how it should have ended. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. She needed to protect Lily, to keep her safe from whatever Karen was trying to do. The weight of the situation seemed to crush her chest as the officers continued talking to Karen, their backs turned to her, oblivious to the storm that was about to unfold. Suddenly, Karen stepped forward, her voice rising. "She's dangerous. She's a threat to the neighborhood," she screamed. Hannah took a step forward, ready to intervene, but something in Karen's posture caught her off guard. There was a shift, a subtle, dangerous change in her demeanor. Before Hannah could react, Karen's hand darted into her bag, pulling out a small, black firearm. The officers had no time to react as Karen quickly pointed the gun toward Lily, her face contorting with a twisted expression of fear and rage. "No!" Hannah screamed, rushing forward, her heart hammering in her chest. But it was too late. In the deafening silence that followed, the sound of a gunshot rang out. Time seemed to slow down as the bullet tore through the air and struck Lily in the chest. It wasn't a violent scream, but a muffled gasp that escaped Lily's lips as she crumpled to the ground, the force of the shot sending her wheelchair tumbling over. Hannah's breath caught in her throat, the world around her spinning as she watched her daughter fall. "Lily!" Hannah cried, her voice breaking as she sprinted toward her, her legs moving on pure instinct. She fell to her knees beside Lily, her heart in her throat as she checked for a pulse, her hands trembling. The blood seeped through Lily's clothes, soaking into Hannah's hands, but the sound of her daughter's breath was barely there. Everything around her faded. The world around her seemed to collapse into a tight, suffocating tunnel. The sirens. The voices. The chaos. It all felt like distant noise as Hannah's focus remained solely on Lily, whose face had gone pale, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. The officers finally sprang into action, yelling at Karen, ordering her to drop the weapon. But it was all too late. The damage had been done. Lily lay in Hannah's arms, her small body limp, the faint rise and fall of her chest the only sign of life. "Please, please, stay with me, Lily," Hannah whispered desperately, her voice shaking with panic. Her tears blurred her vision as she applied pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but the blood kept flowing, staining her hands and her clothes. She could feel her daughter's pulse weakening with every passing second. The officers surrounded Karen, their weapons drawn as they approached her, but Hannah didn't care. Nothing mattered but Lily, her daughter, her baby, lying there in her arms, fighting for breath. The chaos around her seemed to be happening in slow motion, the harsh commands from the officers to Karen, the frantic cries from the neighbors watching from their windows, the growing thrum of sirens approaching from every direction. It all faded into a blur, a distant echo that couldn't reach Hannah. She could only focus on the rapid rise and fall of Lily's chest, the pain of what was happening, and the searing fear that she might lose her. "Lily," Hannah sobbed, her voice breaking, "please don't leave me. Don't leave me." Her words were choked, her throat tight with the weight of the fear and helplessness that threatened to drown her. As the seconds dragged on, it felt like a lifetime. It was only when an officer knelt beside her, his voice low and urgent, that Hannah looked up for the first time. He was trying to reassure her, but the words didn't reach her. He was calling for an ambulance, trying to get help, but it was all just noise. All she could hear, all she could feel, was the pounding of her own heartbeat, a steady reminder of just how close she was to losing the most important person in her life. "I couldn't believe my daughter had been shot, all because someone thought she was a threat," Hannah thought as she clung to Lily, not knowing if her words would ever be enough to undo the pain. The only thing she knew for certain was that this moment, the moment when everything shattered, would change their lives forever. The ambulance arrived in a flurry of activity, the paramedics rushing Lily into the vehicle, with Hannah clinging to her daughter's side, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief. Every second felt like an eternity as the doors slammed shut, sealing off Lily from the chaos that had erupted outside. Hannah was left standing in the street, her body trembling, the world around her spinning out of control. She barely registered the officers approaching, their voices distant and muffled, as though coming from another life. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions," one of the officers said, his voice firm but not unkind. Hannah nodded, her eyes not leaving the ambulance. It didn't matter what they asked her right now. All she could think about was Lily. Was she going to be okay? What if she wasn't? But she had no choice but to answer. The officer gently led her toward a squad car, away from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. The sound of murmurs from behind windows was still fresh in her ears, and Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that the community was already forming its own conclusions about what had just happened. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened here?" the officer asked again, taking out a notebook. "Karen, she shot my daughter," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't say it any louder. The words were too heavy. "We need to hear your side of the story." "We've already spoken to Karen," the officer continued. "She claims she was in fear for her life." Hannah blinked, the absurdity of Karen's version of events hitting her like a physical blow. Fear for her life? She was the one with the gun. Lily didn't do anything wrong. She felt her hands shaking as the adrenaline slowly started to fade, leaving behind only the raw sting of betrayal and anger. The officer nodded, writing something down in his notebook. "We understand. But we need to figure out what led to this. We've got to be thorough. Karen's statements will be taken into account, but we'll be looking at all angles. Do you have any idea why she might have done this?" Hannah paused, her mind spinning. Why would Karen do something so extreme? The answer wasn't easy, but the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Karen had been obsessed with maintaining control over the neighborhood. She had always complained about minor issues, from the lawn to the positioning of garbage cans. But this was something different. She doesn't like Lily. She never has. She's always made comments, always acted like we didn't belong here. She's always been looking for a reason to cause trouble. This was just the breaking point. The officer's pen stopped, and he looked up at her, eyes narrowed. You're telling me that this was all premeditated? I'm not saying she planned it, but I know Karen, Hannah said, her voice stronger now. I know how she thinks. She saw Lily, a disabled child, and she saw a problem. She made up her mind, and I'm sure this isn't the first time she's harbored those thoughts. Lily never did anything to her. She's just a kid, trying to live her life. But Karen had a different view of things. The officer nodded slowly, processing the information. All right, ma'am. We'll take everything you've said into account. But we need to be clear, Karen's story is going to be taken seriously, and so is yours. But right now, the neighborhood is divided. Hannah's stomach churned. She could feel the eyes of the community on her, even if they weren't speaking. Some would take Karen's side, believing the false narrative that had been painted. But others, some of the neighbors who knew the real story, were starting to question Karen's motives. This is just too much, Hannah muttered under her breath. How do you prove the innocence of someone who was just trying to live their life? How do I make them see Lily for who she really is? The officer paused for a moment, his gaze softening as he considered her words. It's going to take time, ma'am. We'll investigate all leads. We'll review the footage from the security cameras, talk to witnesses. We'll get to the truth. As the officer walked away to continue his investigation, Hannah stood there, feeling like a ghost in her own life. The investigation had only just begun, but Hannah knew the road ahead would be long and hard. There would be no easy answers, no quick fixes. The truth would have to be uncovered piece by piece, and with every piece, Karen's false narrative would have to be dismantled. But even as she stood there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her, Hannah knew one thing for certain: she would never stop fighting for Lily. Not until justice was served. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel fell with a loud, commanding echo. Hannah sat at the back, her face a mask of both hope and despair. She had waited for this moment, the moment when justice would finally be served, but now that it was here, the weight of the reality hit her. The fight for Lily's dignity, for her daughter's right to simply exist without fear, had taken everything from her: her peace, her trust, her faith in the world around her. Yet, she couldn't turn back now. She had to see it through, even if it broke her. Across the room, Karen sat, her lawyer whispering words of reassurance in her ear, her expression cold and unfazed. To her, this was just another battle she had to win, another way to prove she was right, no matter the cost. But Hannah saw through the facade. She saw the fear hiding behind Karen's eyes, the fear of facing the consequences of what she had done. The prosecutor stood up, addressing the court with authority. We have evidence that Karen acted with malice and intent. Lily was no threat to her, and yet she made the decision to take a life, no matter how narrowly, and for what? Because of an irrational fear, a baseless prejudice against a disabled child. There is no justification for what happened that day. Hannah clenched her fists, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. She could feel the anger bubbling inside her, an anger that threatened to consume her. She had always prided herself on being rational, on thinking with clarity, but in that moment, she wanted to scream. She wanted to tear Karen down and make her understand the pain she had caused, the suffering she had inflicted on a child who only ever wanted to be loved. But as the prosecutor continued, Hannah realized something important: this was no longer just about punishing Karen. It was about making sure that Lily's voice, her story, was heard. It was about the truth. The defense attorney stood up next, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, we acknowledge that Karen's actions were reckless, but we ask for mercy. She did not intend to harm anyone. She was simply frightened by the situation. Lily posed a threat in her mind, and she acted in what she believed was self-defense. The words hung in the air, and Hannah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Karen had twisted the truth, again. She wasn't even acknowledging what had truly happened. The thought of her standing there, claiming she had acted out of fear when Hannah knew better, made her blood boil. The jury deliberated for hours, the weight of the decision hanging over them. Hannah spent that time pacing in the hallway, unable to sit still, unable to think clearly. Her mind kept going back to that moment, the moment when Karen pulled the trigger. The moment Lily had fallen to the ground, and Hannah had clung to her, desperate to keep her alive. She couldn't let that image go, couldn't forget the terror in Lily's eyes. Eventually, the jury returned, their faces solemn, their eyes hard. Karen looked at them, a flicker of hope crossing her face, but it quickly vanished when the foreman rose to deliver the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. A collective breath was released in the courtroom as Karen's face twisted in disbelief. Her lawyer immediately began speaking, his voice low, trying to mitigate the damage, but Hannah couldn't hear him. She was focused on one thing: justice had been served. Not in the way she had imagined, but it had been served. The judge then spoke, sentencing Karen to 5 years in prison, a sentence that felt far too short for what she had done. But at least it was something. It was something that Hannah could hold on to. It was a measure of justice for Lily, though it could never undo the harm that had been done. It was a step toward accountability. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, her head held high as if she were somehow the victim, Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but there was also something else, something deeper, something more difficult to define. She had been so consumed by the need for revenge, for the desire to make Karen pay for everything she had done. But now, as Karen was taken from the courtroom, Hannah understood that peace didn't come from revenge. I didn't want revenge, Hannah thought as she looked down at the floor, her mind racing. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't always come without a fight. Lily was still recovering, still fragile, but she was alive. And for Hannah, that was enough. She could move forward. They could move forward. There was no more space in her heart for hatred, only for the love she had for her daughter. As she left the courtroom, her steps lighter than they had been in months, Hannah knew that this chapter in their lives was far from over. But for now, they had won. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that justice, in the end, was worth the fight. What would you do if it was your child? How far would you go to protect the ones you love? The story of Hannah and Lily is one that demands reflection, but it's not just a story, it's a reality for many. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss the power of standing up for what's right. If you believe in justice, if you believe in the strength of a mother's love, subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories that challenge the truth and reveal the consequences of our choices. Sometimes the truth is scarier than the lies.